From Swagman Media, this is the Jolly Swagman podcast. Here are your hosts, Angus and Joe.
Hello there, boys and girls, and welcome back to another episode of the Jolly Swagman podcast. I'm Joe Walker, one of your co-hosts, and this is the show where we bring you exceptional people from a diverse range of fields, whether they are investors, academics, entrepreneurs, or philosophers, to bring you some of the best ideas in the world. And very often those ideas are contrarian. We tend to focus on things that are important, yet misunderstood or overlooked. For example, the benefits of fasting and intermittent fasting, or why effective altruism is important, or the Australian property bubble, or short-selling theses about dodgy companies. This episode is about another one of those topics, and that is artificial intelligence. If you're not across why this is a hugely important issue, you have to get with the program, and fortunately we have a number of episodes on the topic that can help you do just that. Talking about artificial intelligence isn't a matter of fantasizing or scaremongering. And that's for two reasons. The first is that the consensus of AI researchers is that we will create artificial general intelligence within the next 50 years, I believe. So, in other words, within my lifetime. And secondly, its arrival is going to represent a step function change in the rate of economic growth, in the same way that the discovery of fire, the agricultural revolution, and the industrial revolution radically transformed the output and the makeup of human societies. Now, the other reason why AI is so important to talk about is we haven't fully solved what's known as the control or the value alignment problem. We can't be 100% sure that if we bring about the dawn of artificial general intelligence, it's going to be amenable to human instructions and it's going to be perfectly aligned with human morals and human aims. Teams of the brightest people around the world are working on this now, but the trick is we need to solve that problem before we create the intelligence. And the first episode we did on AI was with Hugh Price, the Bertrand Russell Professor of Philosophy at Cambridge, and that was sort of an introduction, a survey of the issue. I discussed it in a little more depth in terms of why it's worth focusing on from an effective altruist perspective with Rob Wiblin, the Director of Research at 80,000 Hours, in episode 51, I believe. And in this episode, we go a little bit deeper. So, who's my guest? Well, my guest is Jaan Tallinn. And Jaan is primarily known as one of the co-founders of Skype. So, well before Mark Zuckerberg was purporting to connect the world, Jaan was doing just that through Skype. And he has a background as a theoretical physicist. He's a deeply intelligent and interesting guy. And the most interesting thing about Jaan isn't Skype, although we do speak about that, but it is his interest in artificial intelligence. Because at the age of 33, when Skype sold to eBay for $2.5 billion, Jaan was pretty much set for many lifetimes. He could have retired then and there, but he decided to focus on how he could have a large social impact and what he could do next. And as we discuss in this podcast, that led him to focusing on AI, the issue of AI safety. And he's done a multitude of things in that area since leaving Skype. He co-founded the Center for the Study of Existential Risk at Cambridge with Hugh Price, our former guest, and Sir Martin Rees, Britain's Astronomer Royal. He co-founded the Future of Life Institute at MIT, to which Elon Musk is the largest donor. And he's also invested in a lot of AI companies as well as an angel investor. For example, he's an investor in and a director on the board of DeepMind, the AI company famously acquired by Google. So Jaan knows a lot about the topic, and I hope this gives you more of a sense of some of the key issues involved in AI research today. Of course, it's not by any means a comprehensive discussion of the topic, but we do reference a lot of things that you can follow up if you want to learn more about why we need to work on this problem with the utmost urgency that we can. So I really hope you enjoyed this conversation. I certainly enjoyed speaking with Jaan over Skype, of course. And without much further ado, I bring you Jaan Tallinn. Boom. We are recording. Jaan Tallinn, tere hommikust.
Tere hommikust.
Thank you for joining me. You are in Estonia and I am in Sydney, but we're using Skype, so this should go flawlessly.
Usually, I had problems when some people announce that we are using Skype for this remote interview, and we have the creator of Skype in the room, and of course then things go downhill from there.
Well, it would be remiss of me not to thank you at the outset for your involvement in co-founding Skype, because it enables about half of our interviews. So thank you. And I'm looking forward to asking you about the story of creating the company and also about the work that you're now doing in artificial intelligence since leaving Skype. But before we get to that, I wanted to start by asking you about your background, because you grew up in the Eastern Bloc, which must have been an incredibly different experience to anything I can understand, having been born in Australia during the post-Cold War era. Can you just tell me what it was like in the 70s and the 80s in Estonia under Soviet occupation? Do you have any salient memories of what that time was like?
Yeah. First of all, before I went to school, I spent most of my time with my grandparents in eastern part, mostly Russian-speaking part of Estonia. And my grandfather actually used to be a priest, which was sort of a interesting profession to have in very atheist country where religions were basically suppressed. So yeah, I was before I went to school. I was mostly spending my time on church estate again, which is a curious place to be when you're growing up in Soviet Union. But when I went to school, then I moved back to Tallinn, which is the capital of Estonia, and to live with my parents. And it was transformative to see the environment change so drastically, both in a social, political, and eventually the economic environment around. Yeah. So in some ways, I've been putting it this almost when I grew up, I was born into a country that didn't really have much future as far as I could tell, and probably wouldn't have had much impact in this empire. But when I just entered the years where I was able to start an independent life, the empire sort of stood back, and indeed there was a pretty transformative time back then.
So while all this was happening, you started computer programming while you were at high school. How did you first become interested in that?
Yeah, I actually started programming even before I went to high school. So what happened was that in the primary school, there was a parent who was running a computing center, like a Soviet time computing center, and he was looking for bright people or bright kids to introduce to computers. So he picked out four kids from that school, and I was one of those 4 kids that I picked out, and then I was introduced to big mainframe Soviet-style computers. I think they were actually made in Poland, if I remember correctly. And yeah, so that was how I was introduced to computers. And the interesting thing about computers back then was that they were like really boring compared to the computers now. But they represented a massive potential you could kind of understand. So in some sense, I think learning to program back then was way more motivating and interesting than it is now, because computers are like this blank canvas that you like. If you wanted to do something great, if you wanted the computer to have something great, something interesting, like a new game, you had to do it. And if you did it, like you had immediately something that is actually comparable to existing software. Whereas like no matter how much effort you put now into learning programming, you will never be able to on your own develop something that is remotely comparable to what already exists.
And it was at high school that you met a classmate, Artie Heinler, who became your very good friend and who ended up actually being the chief technical architect of Skype. Do you remember the time you first met Artie? And
Yeah. Artie now is running a successful robotics company called Starship. That's doing kind of deliver robots. We actually met at physics Olympiad, science Olympiad. When I was in high school, I was really heavily involved in science Olympiads. When first I met Ahti, I was basically beaten by him in physics at the physics Olympiad. And because our school was very competitive, our physics teacher approached Ahti and said that like, don't you want to kind of jump ship and join our school? And which he did. So that's how we kind of first met and then became classmates, and eventually started a company together. That company being a games developer, we
games developer, yeah,
we kind of jokingly called ourselves Estonian games industry because like there weren't any. We were the only kind of serious games developer in Estonia in the 90s.
Yeah, sort of a one company industry. So let's talk about your physics background now, Jaan, because I think this is very interesting and it sort of explains how you think about the world, at least in part. But you took a theoretical physics degree at Tartu University and graduated in 1996. Your thesis was in interstellar travel using warps in space-time. Can you just explain a little bit about that thesis? Is that theoretically possible?
This is like those kind of restaurant menus that make like where the titles make the thing sound much more delicious than it actually is.
Okay.
It was actually a very simple paper. The purpose of which was mostly to kind of show that I can come up with a scientific paper rather than do any original research. But yes, so I graduated as a general relativist. And it was I kind of analyzed using my computer skills basically I did model a structure called wormholes, where you with basically like hypothetical structures in space-time that might enable one to travel from one place to another without actually like going the long way.
And I've also read somewhere that you've been known to sketch potential solutions to teleportation on napkins in restaurants. Is teleportation linked to the wormhole idea?
Well, I guess it was just someone's joking when they wrote my profile, so I think that is what it is. Well, I do think that teleportation using wormholes is actually much less likely than using doing teleportation using just kind of information capture and scanning in one person and recreating it or that person in some other place, which I think is not against the laws of physics as we know it. In fact, one of my recent investments is in a brain preservation company called Necto, which is trying to preserve brains so they could be scanned in.
Wow. So if you scanned someone in, say you scanned someone in Thailand and then replicated them in Sydney, would you then destroy the first copy in Thailand?
Yeah, this is how you get into the philosophical problems like of identity. That does make it difficult, because like if you just want to have one copy, then indeed you have to destroy the previous one, which is problematic to say the least.
If you were giving advice to a young person graduating high school today, what university degree would you recommend as the one that sets them up best for making a societal impact?
Well, I mean, I'm very biased, but I do think that physics and computer programming or computer science are very likely to be valuable. In some ways, I sometimes I say that the programmer is the last occupation on the planet, because like I think it was Andreessen Horowitz who wrote this famous essay called "Software is Eating the World," where he described that a lot of the things that humans do, they basically are being turned from hardware problems to software problems, which means that the complexity of creating anything really will concentrate in the software part of it. I mean, you can think of like self-driving cars. Like the most complex part of a self-driving car is the software, and in general, like if you look at anything, like your phones, your cameras, etc., the software component in them is going to just increase over time. More general advice I would suggest or I'll give is to go to 80,000hours.org, which is a career advice site that basically just doesn't give like one option. It basically looks at like what are your possible interests and abilities, and then tries to fit those into what the world would likely need.
Yeah, I interviewed Rob Wiblin, the director of research at 80,000 Hours, a couple of podcast episodes ago. So we gave it. Yeah, really good guy.
Indeed.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about Skype then. I don't want to dwell on it too much because I think the most important conversation we can have is about artificial intelligence, but it is a significant part of your story, and you're the first person I've ever spoken to who has essentially created a new verb. In the same way that people talk about Googling something or Ubering somewhere, people talk about Skyping each other. And I didn't realize this until I started doing some research ahead of this interview, but because of Skype and Kazaa, another platform you founded, you currently hold the world's record for the largest number of software downloads at almost 500 million. Is that still true?
I don't think it's true anymore. I think like things like WhatsApp or like various mobile apps are like far surpassed that number. But that number must be like a decade old or something.
Well, at any rate, it's been a hugely successful company in connecting people around the world. And I'm interested in how you first formed the team, because there was about 4 or 5 co-founders, if I'm not mistaken, and it was very much a collaborative project. You met Nicholas Zenstrom and Jonas Friis, who were two of the main co-founders, while you were doing a project at that company called Yolted, and you were building out the back end called Kazaa. Can you just explain to us what Kazaa was?
So Kazaa was this file-sharing network that was the successor to Napster. So when Napster was shut down,
which people will know for Sean Parker, who was also the first president of Facebook.
Indeed, I actually had like one meeting with Sean Parker a few years ago, and it was fun to reminisce the day. And actually, just last week I talked to Jed McKillop, who was the creator of eDonkey, which was one of the programs that surpassed or succeeded Kazaa after Kazaa was mostly harassed into non-existing.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting to see that
a lot of people have tried.
Yeah, like people who did various projects in my kind of field 10 years ago or so, like now I'm going to bump into them in different contexts.
Yeah, it's kind of nice. Skype began in late 2002, but just take us back to the lead up to actually founding the company. How did that develop?
Yeah, so the backstory there was that we had done this, really massively successful file sharing software, and the company that was under which it was done was indeed Jolted, which was co-founded by Jaanus and Niklas. And we started doing the next version of Kazaa, where we basically figured out ways how to make this system way more scalable, because the problem with original Kazaa was that the technical architecture was never meant to accommodate so many people that Kazaa eventually had. So it was kind of like breaking at seams. And then was this, I think actually Ahti went to Nepal to have like a vacation. And before that, I had given him like an idea that he back then considered impossible, how to kind of solve the technical challenge of scaling a peer-to-peer network. But when he came back from Nepal, he said that like on this mountain, I had like this awesome idea how to make this thing scale. So, and indeed, it was a very great idea. So we started working on Kazaa too, how to make a file sharing network that actually would have no trouble accommodating billions of people potentially. But then Kazaa got into a lot of legal trouble. So developing the next version actually became harder and harder. So we were looking around. What else can we apply to this peer-to-peer technology to? And eventually, we ended up considering a peer-to-peer like ISP or like internet provider. That's where the name comes from, Sky Peer. Like you have peers in the sky. That was eventually shortened to Skyper, and then the R was dropped, so that's how we got Skype. But we wanted to have certain services on top of the network to kind of lure in users to this new internet platform. But I still had the email from Toivo, another founding engineer of Skype, where he had gone through a lot of existing voice over IP offerings and found that like none of them work properly. And then he said that perhaps there's an idea to do our own voice over IP software, so which we did. And so in 2003, Skype was kind of spun off from Jolted, and at that point, 7 people, 4 Estonians, 2 Scandinavians, and 1 American got founding shares. So Skype, depending how you count, Skype started as a project in Jolted that had 2 co-founders, and then when it was spun off, it got 7 co-founders. When I said ISP, it was sort of a virtual ISP that we wanted to develop by having people share out their Wi-Fi. So it would create like a peer-to-peer network of computers that you can connect to, rather than having like a centralized ISP. I think there was like a Spanish network that later, like a decade later, did that called FON. I'm not sure what happened to it and is it still existing. So I think the idea was pretty sound, but turned out that the voice over IP part of it was even more sound.
Yeah, the most valuable. Was there anyone else doing the voice over IP at the time? I don't ever remember any other platforms being options at the time.
So, I mean, that's what I said, that back then there were several voice over IP offerings, but they didn't really work properly. They kind of made a bunch of technical assumptions that were not correct. One way of putting it is that voice over IP back then, in the early 2000s, was modeled after an email. So you had the email structure. You have this component called gateways. You need. Now you can. Now we have the time of webmail. So the email gateways are provided by things like Google, or companies like Google or Apple. So they sort of are transparent. But back then, you needed a gateway from your ISP, your internet provider, that they could connect to, and then that you could connect your email clients to. And so that was a successful protocol. And people who are thinking about how to do the voice over IP standards, they use that as an example. But the problem there was that created a massive chicken and egg situation, where you needed those gateways to be set up by internet service providers in order for the clients to work. But if you didn't clients, the ISPs didn't really have incentive to set up those gateways. Therefore, Skype was one of the first, if not the first, voice over IP that did the entire protocol purely peer-to-peer, so you didn't have to be reliant on your ISPs installing technical things.
So by the end of 2010, there were about 660 million Skype users. How did the company scale so quickly? Was it mostly viral growth, or did you do a lot of marketing as well?
No, I once joked that being a marketing person in Skype was one of the worst jobs on the planet, because nothing depended on you. Skype was inherently very strongly viral. So once you install Skype on your computer, you immediately had incentive to pitch it to the people that you want to talk to, because the value of Skype for every user is basically proportional to amount of connections that user can make using that software. And because there were no strong alternatives, pitching Skype was the obvious thing to do. That's what's called network effect.
Yeah, that's right. And the kind of very simple formula is that the value, or V, equals N squared. So the number of people in the network squared.
Yes.
So in September 2005, so about almost exactly 3 years after you started the company, it sells to eBay for $2.5 billion. And that sort of represents another step function in your life, where things change a lot, because at that point you sold all of your shares. It's interesting that Skype's gone through maybe another 2 acquisitions since then. I think in September 2009, eBay announced that it was selling about 65% of its Skype ownership to a consortium of venture capital firms, including Andreessen Horowitz. And then again in May 2011, Microsoft acquired Skype for $8.5 billion US. But by that stage, you had sort of severed your connection with the company. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I sort of I eased out from the company gradually. Right. So even after Microsoft bought it, I technically still had a contract to consult. But even before, basically, I think somewhere around the time when Silver Lake and Andreessen Horowitz bought it, I started easing out and looking for new things to do.
Sure. So around 2009, you started easing out.
Yes, indeed.
How did your life change? What does it feel like when you have a huge exit like that? Did you take a few months off to kind of celebrate that moment?
No, because like I said, my exit wasn't really like one day thing. Like, it kind of took me 2 years really to exit. So like just like during that time, I was searching for what the next thing should be. It was like I even given like one talk in 2011 where I kind of described the situation. In some ways, you are like having like on the rails for most of your life, where like the most obvious decision what to do next is kind of presented to you, and it's like there isn't much ambiguity, and then suddenly the rails end, and you really need to think about like, okay, now I can do a lot of things, but like which of them is a good thing to do.
I think I read somewhere you telling a story about how a friend said to you, Jaan, how does it feel to have accomplished your life's work at such an early age?
Indeed.
Or, you know, achieved everything you could possibly achieve at such a young age.
Yes.
Did you take that as a compliment, or was it a bit of a warning?
Yeah, it was. I probably should have taken it as a warning, but given what happened next. But yeah, it kind of like did have this like bittersweet feeling, because like it kind of implies that nothing you do next is going to be as important as you did, as you have already accomplished.
Skype's had a huge impact on Estonia's startup ecosystem. As far as other Estonian tech companies, where does Skype rank in terms of what it's done for the ecosystem in Estonia?
I think it's just by far number one company so far. I think Skype has contributed, three things to the ecosystem. One is that it kind of just like gave an example that like if you're in Estonia, you can still do things that are world class. And as I say that Estonia is a small place, so people know each other. So they some of them literally went that, hey, I went to high school with that guy. Like if he can do it, I can do it. Second, Skype actually provided a bunch of money to Estonian startup ecosystem that went to angel investments and so on. And third, Skype was like a significant employer in Skype, so it provided like it sort of like worked almost like an incubator for startups, where people, capable people could meet up, get an experience what it is to be or work for a startup, and then when they left, they basically had both connections and the know-how to start their own.
And I think you've gone on to invest in about 4 or 5 companies that were founded by Skype alumni as an angel investor yourself. So.
Or people who are like CTOs from Skype or some other ways connected to Skype network, or Skype Mafia, as it's called.
Yes, Skype Mafia.
Which is still like a small, much more smaller version of the PayPal Mafia, which Reid Hoffman is part of.
Yes. So let's talk about artificial intelligence now, Jaan. So in about 2009, you're searching for things to do next, and as you described, it sort of felt like you'd come to the end of the railway tracks, and there was no obvious direction forward. Before you settled on AI as the issue that you would start giving your time and money to the most, what other ideas did you have? Did you have any other issues or projects that you were working on that you thought might become your new direction?
Yeah, sure. I did consider like all of the like obvious things to do, and sort of dabbled in them. Like if you look at the 4 founding engineers, 4 Estonian founding engineers of Skype, we have all gone like different ways. So like as far as I can tell, there are like 4 possible categories of things that you could be doing with your life when you have like significant exit. So like, one is to become a philanthropist, which I mostly have become by now. Another one is another option is becoming a professional investor, which my friend Toivo, who used to run the Skype engineering office in Tallinn, he basically became a professional investor. Then third option would be to become a serial entrepreneur, so start creating new, like one company after another, and that's what Ahti, the chief technical architect of Skype, has done. And final option would be just retire. So like the fourth founding engineer, Preet, has done that as far as I can tell. So yeah, I did. So one thing that we started together with other founding engineers of Skype was this sort of investment company called Ambient Sound Investments. So I spent quite a lot of time in there back then.
And then in sometime in 2009, you stumbled on the writings of Eliezer Yudkowsky, who's a Californian-based AI researcher. Can you briefly describe who Eliezer is to us and what appealed about his writings so much that the penny dropped for you, that this was the most important thing you could be doing with your time, which was working on artificial intelligence?
Yeah, so Eliezer was and still is one of the leading thinkers when it comes to so-called like long-term AI safety. Like how can we ensure how a system that is smarter than us and understands us and the world better than we understand it will still remain controllable by humans, or at the very least would want the same things from the future than we do. The term now is called either AI control problem or AI alignment problem. So he was like one of the first people to kind of rediscover the problem. Interestingly, the problem of AI alignment and AI control actually goes back to the really invention of the fields of cybernetics and computer science, because both Alan Turing and Norbert Wiener already wrote about this problem back in 1950s and 1960s, but this topic was kind of forgotten for half a century when Eliezer basically picked it up again.
So why did you then decide? I mean, you discovered the importance of the value alignment problem through the writings of Eliezer, but why did you decide that you were the best person to work on this problem?
First of all, it was like kind of surprising. Eliezer's arguments were very Eliezer's conclusion rather was very surprising to me. So first I was just like looking for flaws in his argument, that the default outcome from AI is not going to be good for humanity. But I didn't really discover any flaws. So I eventually wrote to him, and when I was in California in early 2009, we kind of met up and had like a long conversation where he kind of I went there with a list of things that I found are possible errors in his thinking or possible solutions to the problem, and he basically shut them down one by one. At which point I thought that, okay, this probably is the most underappreciated problem on the planet, because it really deals with the future of the entire humanity and possibly the entire universe. And we don't really have people paying attention to this problem. So I thought that, okay, this is where I could possibly help. I could basically take those arguments from this fairly fringe group of people in California and use my street cred and Skype brand, so to speak, to draw attention to these problems. And indeed, it seems to have worked really well.
Let's take a step back and talk about existential risks more broadly. This is now a big focus of the effective altruism movement, of which we're both members. And there are two broad categories of existential risks. Could you just outline what those two categories are and give us a quick list of some examples in each of those categories?
Right. So two categories, broad categories. One is natural existential risks, and the other is man-made existential risks or technological existential risks. Natural existential risks are things like supervolcanoes, for example. Every once in a while, we have like a massive volcano eruption that might actually change the environment to uninhabitable. Or more commonly, or more widely known, asteroid impacts. Again, every 10 million years or so, the asteroid that comes along here or hits the Earth might be like big enough to effectively sterilize the planet. That's how dinosaurs. That's the leading theory why dinosaurs went extinct, was that there was just big enough rock that hit the Mexico area. Now, man-made existential risks are basically risks from advanced technology. One way of looking at this that as we develop more and more powerful technologies, the effective radius of technologies will increase while the planet will remain the same. So it's like really hard to do like massive changes in the environment using like stone axes or even pistols. However, once you have atomic weapons, you might have really, really big impact on the environment. In fact, like the first existential risk report that humanity has produced was called LA 602. That was a report or investigation by the Manhattan Project scientists who were not sure what the impact radius of the nuclear detonation will be. So they seriously considered the possibility that the first nuclear detonation on this planet will actually burn up the atmosphere, thereby basically making the life here go extinct. So they did the calculations and found that looks like there's like about 3x margin still.
So we think that was actually the first example of existential risks research.
As far as I know, yes.
Wow.
So when research or research for the technological existential risks.
Oh, got it. Sure. Yeah, that second category, of which AI is now another example. And when people talk about existential risks, tell us why future generations are morally relevant here.
Right, indeed. My co-founder at the Cambridge Center for the Study of Existential Risk, Lord Martin Rees, he likes to say that there is a difference between killing 90% of people and 100% of people, and the difference is not 10%. The argument there is that if you only create a situation that causes 90% of people to go extinct, it's still possible that the civilization will recover from this 10%. However, if you kill everyone, you basically end the civilization for good, because there will be no future generations to be born that could kind of rebuild civilization. So that's why once you kill everyone, the moral weight of it becomes much larger than just the moral weight of the last 10% is much, much larger than the first 10%, because it will be including the future generations.
So we should in fact add up and consider all of the future wonders and works that a potential civilization in the future could create if it were not for existential destruction.
Indeed, like you can if you just look up in the sky, like the universe is so big compared to what we have on this planet. So once you start counting the amount of exploration, the number of lives, and in general the size of the future that might await humanity, then this is what is at stake when we consider existential risks.
So why is AI an existential risk?
There are many ways to describe why AI is a potential existential risk. So one way of looking at this is that humanity has driven a lot of species extinct, not because we're actively hostile towards them, but we just either find them useful, like mammoths, useful to eat, or we have messed with our environment to the point where we no longer can sustain their population. So, like one way of how we go extinct is similar. I mean, it's unlikely that AI will find humanity useful in the same way that humans found mammoths useful. But the second issue where it just does not care about the environment. If you think about it, like that's why the reason why we send robots to space or to radioactive areas is because robots do not care about the environment, whereas humans have been sort of very finely tuned for a very particular narrow range of environmental parameters. Like if you just like raise the temperature by 100 degrees or lower it by 100 degrees, like we will die in a matter of minutes. Or like if you get rid of the atmosphere, like we will die in a matter of minutes. Whereas robots just don't care. It's very unlikely that the current environmental parameters are going to be optimal for whatever the AIs will by default do. So it's kind of that's why we need to solve the problem of AI alignment, which is transferring the constraints that humans have about the future to make it also a concern of a powerful AI.
So one way of solving this problem is what's known as corrigibility. Can you explain to us what that is?
Corrigibility is like one of the approaches, one of the many approaches actually. And so when I said like if you look at AI safety, like there are like several approaches to AI safety. Like so, one large approach that we just talked about is AI alignment. That is making sure that AI will want same things or similar things that humans want or should want from the future. And the other approach is AI control or control problem, where we don't fully align AI but make it controllable. So if we see it going off the rails, we can stop it. And under this AI control, there are a few approaches there, things like AI boxing or capabilities control, wired tripwires, things like that. One of them is called corrigibility, which is basically kind of instead of programming AI to do what we think it should do, we create an AI that can be kind of nudged along if you see it.
Like trained.
If you see it like deviating from what it should do, we would still have the ability to,
override it in some way.
Yeah, exactly. Course correct it.
Cool. So, all of those different potential ways of addressing the alignment problem, do you think the corrigibility approach is the most promising?
No, I don't think so. I think it's the problem with corrigibility, and in the control problem in general, or trying to solve the control problem in general, is that the solutions there seem to be very unstable. The problem is that it effectively would be giving AI inconsistent orders. We would be telling it first, like, do like whatever we want it to do, like calculate the numbers of pi or something, or make paper clips or something. And then at the same time, we're telling it, oh, actually, if we are going to say that actually, please stop what you're doing, then please stop what you're doing. And like these two instructions actually are in natural tension with each other. Like if AI is instructed to do calculate the numbers of pi, it's immediately also incentivized to figure out how to go around the control mechanism. Because like if it disables controls and manipulates humans to not use it, it will be able to do more numbers of pi or paper clips or what.
Why can't those goals be given a hierarchy? Like number 2, if we tell you to stop, then you must stop, is the absolute goal, and then secondly, we want you to make as many paper clips as possible, under subject to goal number 1.
Yeah. So the problem is that it's very hard to integrate those two conflicting instructions into one consistent instruction. without actually incentivizing the AI to immediately come up with weird definitions of we, and or stop or things like that. So it's in some ways it's much better to solve the AI alignment problem, where we don't try to create like a full bulletproof system where we could stop the AI. Instead, we will just try to make an AI that will naturally do what we want in different situations.
What do you think we're not doing enough of right now that we should be doing more of or doing better?
Yeah, I think that we should be doing way more research into the long-term AI safety questions, because still the community that is doing that is very small, even though there's like increasing awareness even among AI capabilities researchers that this is an issue. For example, a survey 2 years ago of published AI researchers showed that now, that is 2 years ago, in 2016, 40% of published AI researchers think that AI safety is either an important problem or the most important problem of their field. So that awareness still is not kind of reflected in the amount of resources and talent that humanity spends on trying to find answers to AI alignment problem. There are a bunch of technical research that needs to be done. One great example of that is a paper by Dario Amadei and others called Concrete Problems in AI Safety that listed, I think, 5 different technical problems that we need to solve that would not only be useful for the long-term AI safety, but also some near-term problems that you might have.
Great paper. We spoke about that in our episode with Rob Wiblin, and I'll link to that again for anyone who's interested. When it comes to this arms race between, tech companies to develop artificial general intelligence, I've heard you say that AI has a bad Nash equilibrium. Let's just talk about this idea because it's really important. Firstly, just briefly describe what a Nash equilibrium is.
So a Nash equilibrium is this technological, is a game theoretical concept which describes a situation in a multiplayer game, or generally multi-agent system, where the strategies of players are in equilibrium, in the sense that the game will progress predictably, regardless of what any individual player will do. So any individual player will not be able to change the outcome of the game. In order to change the outcome of the game, people have to do some collective, or players have to do some collective action. So you can think of examples of bad Nash equilibriums in various so-called tragedy of commons situations. Yeah. For example, overfishing is something it doesn't really matter what most of the people on this planet do, as long as a small group of people is overfishing, then we will have the problem.
Weirdly, I was thinking of another example the other day, but if you ever wonder why public toilets are so dirty and poorly treated, it's another tragedy of the commons.
Indeed.
Yeah. So why does AI have a bad Nash equilibrium? So
there again is the situation where individual players are incentivized to do one thing, and as long as sufficient number of companies or researchers do this thing, it really doesn't matter what rest of the humanity does. I think that public toilets are a good example there. So it's as long as we have few people messing things up in AI, it doesn't like we will have like a messy outcome, regardless of what how kind of scrupulous the rest of the humanity is. So yeah, the concern is that it is easier to create AI than it is to create safe AI. So if like in order for us to get the safe AI, you need to have the leading project to actually spend extra resources doing safety, AI safety.
So it's like if everyone says let's stop developing this technology until we know how to control it, then there's a strong incentive for an individual player to go ahead and develop the technology anyway, because if they're the first, they're going to have a huge advantage over the market.
Exactly. Like you would
and so if they do that, then everyone else piles on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's very hard to create global regulations to steer something that is as volatile as software.
So the logic of game theory has almost set us on an inevitable trajectory towards developing AI, and the consensus now is that in the meantime we need to scramble as quickly as possible to work out the safety issue before it arrives.
Yeah, although like I think I'm still like more optimistic than saying that this is an inevitability. Like it's still possible that we might be able to get some global regulations, like in the domain of hardware, for example. Like it's like I get like a lot of interest from policymakers recently, and I don't have any kind of concrete suggestions for them. But like one of the things that is kind of like one of the answers that I still feel is good to think about is thinking about like if we want to regulate hardware, like putting limits on how powerful server farms can exist, then it would be useful if you're going to start it a few years earlier to think about which kind of mechanisms we would need to have in place in order to do such regulation. So we would be kind of ready for it in case we need it. I'm not even sure if we will need it, but I think it's plausible that regulating hardware is probably much more tractable than regulating software, and it might be useful eventually.
So you mentioned that you're now lending your name and I guess your street cred to raising more awareness about this issue, notwithstanding the significant resources you've also committed. In the talks that you give around the world, in your experience, what does the public or what do lay people, so to speak, most commonly misunderstand about AI?
Too many things. So one very common misunderstanding is kind of mixing up consciousness and capabilities. As far as I can tell, consciousness and capabilities are just completely orthogonal things. You can have very competent systems that are just not conscious, and vice versa. You can have
Well, are you talking there about the distinction between general and narrow or specific AI?
No, I'm not. I'm just talking about the phenomenon of consciousness, and people have this because the most intelligent system on this planet right now are humans, and we are conscious. So people kind of automatically have this intuition that in order to be very competent, you have to be conscious, which I don't think is true. So like if people say that like we are very far from super competent systems because we don't even know what consciousness is, this is like a very common misunderstanding. We don't really need to understand what consciousness needs in order to build very competent systems, which could be dangerous.
So people use consciousness almost as a proxy for AI.
Yes, or like intelligence, proxy for intelligence. Yes.
So are there any other things people commonly misunderstand about AI?
I mean, one obvious thing is that people assume that as AI gets more powerful, it will get more human-like, or like it will just powerful AI will basically be something that will be just like us. But it's very far from true, because like in some ways a powerful AI will be more alien than alien, because if you will have someday aliens visiting us, we would still share some kind of evolutionary features. For example, evolution has invented eyes many times on this planet, so it's like reasonable to assume that even aliens that have evolved elsewhere would have a certain structure of eyes. But AI just does not share evolutionary past unless it has been created by evolutionary algorithms which have their own issues. So in some ways, like if we are concerned about aliens, then we should be way more concerned about AI, because AI will not share anything in common with us.
So you've already made some huge contributions to the field of AI research through, as I already mentioned, co-founding the Center for the Study of Existential Risk at Cambridge and co-founding the Future of Life Institute at MIT. What are you doing now? What do you think the best use of your time is going forward? Are you just going to continue working on those two projects, or have you set your sights on other things?
Yeah, I think I will continue my kind of general strategy, which is to identify capable people and capable organizations, or capable people who want to create new organizations, and then try to support them. But also, like, one thing that I've been increasingly interested in is trying to develop a better international cooperation around these issues. For example, a month ago, I was in Beijing for a week, talking to various people in AI there. And I do think like one of the crucial questions that we need to figure out is how to avoid so-called arms race in technology, specifically in AI, because like once you have a situation where we're basically racing in terms of capabilities, like safety is one of the things that will likely be sacrificed in this kind of situation. So it's important to have all players understand that we should avoid the AI arms race.
Are you hopeful?
Yeah, so far so good. I mean, it's still like early days when it comes to kind of thinking about these issues, but there are some people whose job it is to figure out how to avoid AI arms races, and some people that I know whose full-time job it is. I kind of have high respect, and when I talk to people different places in the world, they at least seem to understand that this is going to be a problem. So like the first thing that you need to solve a problem is to acknowledge it. So at least in fairly making good progress in the acknowledgement front, at least.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts about artificial intelligence with me. It's been really interesting, and we're going to continue talking about it on this podcast. I think we have a few more interviews lined up this year with some prominent researchers in the field. But before I let you go, I just had a few random questions that I thought I would ask while I have the opportunity. I guess sort of personal questions or advice that you might have for our audience. There's a lot of entrepreneurs in the audience. And the first question, Jaan, is you're a successful angel investor. Earlier in the conversation, you mentioned ambient sound investments, which is the vehicle that you use for that at the moment. Do you have any good heuristics that you use to pick the founders and companies that you back?
Well, I think I have fairly unorthodox heuristics, because I'm trying to do investments while spending as little time as possible on doing investments, which in practice means that I mostly invest in people that I already know. So I have several investments in Skype alumni companies, or with people that I know. So I've been working with a few VCs that basically do the hard work, and then I kind of co-invest with them. So in that sense, Investment
so
questions you need to ask like professional investors, not me.
Got it. So the VCs do the due diligence, and then
Indeed.
you go in with them. Nice. That's a good little life hack for any listeners.
For lazy investors.
Yeah. Or smart investors, maybe. The other question I wanted to ask you about how you manage your time is to do with the make and manager schedule, which Paul Graham, the legendary entrepreneur and founder of Y Combinator, kind of pioneered. And I realized, in trying to organize the interview with you, that you do the make and manager schedule yourself. It's actually something that I've tried over the last couple of years and also recommended to friends and colleagues at different times. But just describe what it is, the make and manager schedule.
So yeah, as Paul Graham says, manager schedule is basically like where you are full time just talking to people. So like if you have, if you have like a new meeting request coming in, then it's like very easy to find time for it. You just look at your calendar, where is the 1 hour free slot, and put the meeting there. Whereas if you are a maker, you need to concentrate on problems for like extended period of time. And if you are interrupted during that, then like you're going to waste a lot of time because you have to start all over. Therefore, having like one meeting or one call can basically destroy the productivity of half a day. Therefore, what I do is like I try to do calls and group all my calls and meetings as much as I can into like one day per week, and then have like rest of the week for things like preparing speeches or documents or coding, which I still do.
Right. So you divide your week up into maker and manager.
Or my days. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. So most people have the morning as the maker and then the afternoon as the manager. Is that what you do?
No, I try to. I keep entire day. My maker days, I want to.
Got it.
Keep completely free, because like the one issue is that like if you have things in the afternoon, then you can't sort of run over. If you are basically going to flow, and like your essay or your code or something just like starts to really progress nicely, then you basically have to like always keep looking at the watch and then like see like when is the meeting or the call, rather than just like concentrating on the problem at hand.
Yeah, or you start anticipating the meeting or worrying about it, thinking about what you're going to say.
Exactly, like part of your mind is already kind of thinking about the meeting rather than the problem.
What's been the biggest struggle or the darkest period of your career?
I think the toughest moments really were during my games development days, when it was like always like a struggle to make end meets, to find publishers, to meet deadlines. So that was really hard time, where I kind of on the other hand I really grew when it comes to coding skills, as well as management skills, as well as negotiation skills, etc., etc. So that was like a great training period, but it was truly tough. And also like when we had lawsuits during the Kazaa time, and there was like this big lawsuit during Skype. That these were also like kind of stressful periods.
Yeah. Going back to that time when you were a computer game programmer, and then during some of those difficult lawsuits, what sort of things would you tell yourself to keep yourself optimistic and productive?
I haven't thought of it that way. Well, I mean, it's always easy to say things that contain information from the future.
Yes, yeah.
But I don't know. Say things like buy Apple. But I'm not sure if I mean, there's like always this advice that I think applies to tough situations in general, not just professionally. Is that there is this thing called reversion to the mean, meaning that your circumstances are part your own doing and part just external factors or luck. So if things are really tough, it usually means that those two elements combine in a way that there are things that you have done wrong that combine with the external factors that you did not have control over. The good news there is that these external factors, they sometimes are worse, sometimes are better, which means that during the tough time, it's likely that they will get better, meaning that also your situation will improve because of the external factors, even if there's a part of the situation is your fault, and vice versa. If things are going really well, it's kind of reasonable to assume that after a while they will basically come back to normal.
Yeah, and obviously the textbook example of reversion to the mean is company stock performance, but there's another really good example that Daniel Kahneman talks about when he was consulting the Israeli Air Force. The military captains always used to chastise the pilots who performed poorly in training and praise the pilots who did well, until they discovered that the pilots who did well, who they praised, subsequently didn't do as well, whereas the pilots who did poorly, who they chastised, did better the next time around. And so they concluded that they would only ever criticize poorly performing pilots, but they wouldn't ever praise the pilots who performed well. And Danny eventually pointed out that it wasn't their praise that was affecting the outcomes. It was purely a statistical process of regression to the mean.
Yeah, that's why the coaches, quite a lot of them just get really cranky because they learn to be angry because they see whenever they're angry, then performance improves.
Yeah, that's right. How has your life turned out differently to what you expected it to? Thinking back to your university days at Tartu.
I mean, yeah, I certainly did not expect to be working on really global issue and have the resources to make a difference. I was much more during the university days, I was knee deep in my software or games development, running this games company. So my aspirations were mostly making it big in games industry. So that definitely did not happen, for better or for worse.
And finally, what fundamentally motivates you then to work on this global issue? Why didn't you take that fourth option for someone who's had an exit of retiring?
I think retiring is just boring.
Okay.
So yeah, the main, what I find is that basically doing things that are meaningful means that you're doing things that have a positive impact on the world. Mm-hmm. And you can basically take a conscious approach there, and instead of just going with the flow, you think about what are the things that you could do that have the biggest positive impact. And if you do that, you will find that there are underappreciated areas. So in some ways, you should be looking at life as an investor, seeing what are the underappreciated, impactful assets that you could be, or topics that you could be spending your time on. Being an intelligent contrarian there actually helps, just in investing.
So what you're sort of saying is that, if you care about the world, climate change is a really important issue, but there are already thousands of people working on climate change. So what additional difference are you going to make by going to work on climate change, work on something that's a bit more neglected?
Exactly. Or unless you figure out some like really underappreciated way to address climate change, then you might be making an impact that's like a million times bigger than anyone who is working on raising awareness or whatnot in climate change.
Yeah, that's really good advice to finish on, Jaan. And look, thank you so much for your time. It's been a real privilege speaking with you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, my friend, for listening to that conversation with the great Jaan Tallinn. For everything we discussed in the episode, links will be available on our website, thejollyswagman.com. And if you did enjoy it, I would ask if you could please rate and review on iTunes and share us with a friend if you think especially that they need to hear about the issue of artificial intelligence. I'm sure they would love to listen to that conversation. And until next time, thanks for listening. Ciao.